Former White House aide Steve Bannon lost his mind after he lost his job at the White House. U.S. President Donald Trump has said. Former White House aide Steve Bannon lost his mind after he lost his job at the White House. U.S. President Donald Trump has said. The president disavowed Mr. Bannon after he was quoted in a new book describing a meeting between Mr. Trump's son and a group of Russians as treasonous. The Russians had offered Donald Trump Jr. damaging information on Hillary Clinton at the June 2016 meeting. Mr. Bannon's quote appears in a new book by journalist Michael Wolff. Steve Bannon has nothing to do with me or my presidency. When he was fired, he not only lost his job, he lost his mind, Mr. Trump said in a statement on Wednesday. Steve was a staffer who worked for me after I had already won the nomination by defeating 17 candidates, often described as the most talented field ever assembled in the Republican Party, he continued. Now that he is on his own, Steve is learning that winning isn't as easy as I make it look. Steve had very little to do with our historic victory, which was delivered by the forgotten men and women of this country. Mr. Bannon, the president's former chief strategist, was considered a key player in the Trump White House and helped shape Mr. Trump's America First campaign message before he left his post in August. He returned to his role as the head of the right-wing Breitbart News website, where he said he planned to help Mr. Trump's administration as a wingman outside. Mr. Trump reportedly spoke to Mr. Bannon as recently as the 13th of December, the day of the special U.S. Senate election in Alabama that saw the defeat of Republican Roy Moore, whom Mr. Bannon supported. The president reportedly spoke to his former chief strategist for 15 minutes. According to the New York Times, White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders said she believed Mr. Trump's last conversation with Mr. Bannon took place in the early part of December. The president's comments came hours after the explosive new book, Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House, revealed that Mr. Bannon called Mr. Trump Jr.'s meeting treasonous and unpatriotic. Speaking to the author, Mr. Bannon said of the investigation into whether there was any collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, "They're going to crack Don Jr. like an egg on national TV." Mr. Wolff's book also alleges that former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair told Mr. Trump during a meeting last February that the British intelligence services may have been spying on him and his campaign, according to a report in the Times newspaper. In March, the White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer told journalists UK intelligence services could have been involved in an alleged spying operation on Trump Tower in New York. GCHQ said the allegation was nonsense. Trump wiretapping claim, did Obama bug his successor? The Times says Mr. Blair was hoping to get a job advising Mr. Trump on the Middle East. A spokeswoman for Mr. Blair told The Times that the allegations were a total fabrication, and said Mr. Blair had not suggested himself as Mr. Trump's Middle East envoy. Emails show Mr. Trump Jr. agreed to meet Russian associates in June 2016 on the premise that they had damaging information against his father's Democratic rival, Hillary Clinton. The meeting was also attended by Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and aide, and then campaign chairman Paul Manafort. Mr. Bannon reportedly told Mr. Wolff that the three senior campaign officials should have called the FBI immediately after the meeting, according to U.S. media reports. The Senate, House of Representatives and a special counsel are all investigating alleged Russian interference in the presidential election and alleged attempts to undermine Mrs. Clinton, a claim denied by the Kremlin. Mr. Trump has also vehemently denied any collusion. Mrs. Sanders described the book as filled with false and misleading accounts from individuals who have no access or influence with the White House. Participating in a book that can only be described as a trashy tabloid fiction exposes the sad, desperate attempts at relevancy. BBC